Marcus Washington walked through the school hallway with his head down, trying to make himself invisible. At 15 years old, he was already 6 feet tall and weighed almost 200 pounds. His dark skin glistened with sweat as he hurried to his next class, clutching his worn backpack tightly against his chest. The other students barely looked at him, and when they did, it was usually followed by whispered comments or cruel laughter. Every morning started the same way for Marcus. He would wake up at 5:30 in their small apartment, make breakfast for himself, while his mother got ready for her job cleaning houses across town. His father had already left for the factory where he worked double shifts just to pay the rent. Marcus understood why his parents worked so hard, but it meant he spent most of his time alone. School was supposed to be a place of learning, but for Marcus it felt more like a battlefield where he had to survive each day. He had learned to eat lunch in the library where it was quiet and nobody bothered him. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, was kind to him and sometimes let him help organize books after school. She never asked why he spent so much time there, but Marcus could tell she understood. During classes, Marcus sat in the back row and kept his eyes on his notebook. He was actually very smart, and his grades were good, but he never raised his hand to answer questions. The few times teachers called on him, some students would snicker when they heard his quiet voice. Marcus had learned that speaking up only drew unwanted attention. The worst part of school was walking through the hallways between classes. Groups of students would sometimes bump into him on purpose, then act like it was his fault. Others would make loud comments about his weight, or the fact that his clothes were not the latest fashion. Marcus wore the same 3 shirts and 2 pairs of jeans all week, because those were all his family could afford. What nobody at school knew was that Marcus had a secret. Every day after school, instead of going straight home, he would take a bus to the other side of town where his grandfather lived. His grandfather, Samuel Washington, was 72 years old and lived alone in a small house with a basement that had been converted into something very special. Samuel had been a boxer in his younger days, fighting in underground rings when times were tough. He had taught himself various fighting styles over the years, mixing boxing with moves he learned from friends who practiced martial arts. When Marcus was 8 years old, Samuel had started teaching him these skills, but with one very important rule. The rule was simple but strict. Marcus could only use what he learned if someone was in real danger. Not just being teased or pushed around, but actual serious danger. Samuel had made Marcus promise this over and over again. He explained that real strength was not about hurting people, but about protecting those who could not protect themselves. For 7 years, Marcus had kept this promise. Even when Jake Miller and his friends started bothering him more and more, Marcus remembered his grandfather's words. He practiced in the basement 3 times a week, learning to control his movements, his breathing, and most importantly, his temper. The basement was like a different world for Marcus. There were heavy bags hanging from the ceiling, mats on the floor, and mirrors on the walls. His grandfather had built this place as his own private gym, and now it was where Marcus felt most like himself. Here, he was not the fat kid that everyone ignored or made fun of. Here, he was strong, fast, and confident. Samuel would watch Marcus train and see the potential that nobody else could see. The boy had natural talent and incredible determination. His grandfather knew that someday Marcus might need to use these skills, but he hoped that day would never come. Marcus never told anyone about his training, not even his parents. They knew he visited his grandfather regularly, but they thought he just helped with chores around the house. Marcus kept his 2 worlds completely separate, never imagining that soon they would collide in a way that would change everything. The bullying had started small, but now it was getting worse every week. Jake Miller was the leader of the group that made Marcus's life difficult. Jake was popular, played on the basketball team, and thought he owned the school. He had 3 friends who followed him everywhere and laughed at everything he did, even when it was not funny. It began with small things. Jake would knock Marcus's books out of his hands when he walked past in the hallway. His friends would trip Marcus or push him when teachers were not looking. They would throw crumpled paper at him during lunch and make loud comments about his size and his old clothes. Marcus tried his best to ignore them. He would pick up his books without saying anything and keep walking. When they pushed him, he would steady himself and continue on his way. He never fought back or even looked angry, which seemed to make Jake and his friends even more determined to get a reaction. The worst incidents happened after school when teachers were not around. One day, Jake pushed Marcus so hard that he fell down the stairs. Marcus scraped his knee badly, and his books scattered everywhere. While he was picking them up, Jake stood over him laughing and calling him names. Some other students saw what happened, but nobody helped. They were all too afraid of Jake to stand up for Marcus. Another time, Jake and his friends cornered Marcus in the bathroom. They splashed water on his shirt and told him he smelled bad. They laughed as Marcus tried to dry his shirt with paper towels, knowing he would have to walk around school looking wet and embarrassed for the rest of the day. The bullying was not just physical. Jake would make loud comments about Marcus's family being poor. He would say things like how Marcus probably ate garbage for dinner, or how his parents were too broke to buy him decent clothes. These words hurt Marcus more than the pushing and shoving because they were partly true, and Marcus was ashamed of his family situation. Word of the bullying spread through the school, but in a way that made things worse for Marcus. Some students felt sorry for him, but were too scared to help. Others thought it was funny and would gather around when Jake started bothering Marcus, treating it like entertainment. A few teachers noticed something was wrong, but Marcus never complained or asked for help. One Tuesday afternoon, the situation escalated beyond anything that had happened before. Marcus was walking home from school, taking his usual route through the neighborhood. He preferred this path because it was quiet, and he rarely saw other students. But today, Jake and his 3 friends had followed him. They started by calling out to him from behind, using the cruel nicknames they had made up. When Marcus did not turn around or respond, they began throwing small rocks at his back. The rocks were not big enough to really hurt, but they stung and left small marks on his shirt. Marcus walked faster, hoping they would get bored and leave him alone. But Jake and his friends kept following, getting braver with each passing minute. They began shouting louder, not caring if neighbors heard them. They knew that in this part of town, most people minded their own business and would not get involved. From her kitchen window, Marcus's grandmother watched the scene unfold. She had been visiting Marcus's family for the day and was washing dishes when she saw her grandson being followed by the group of boys. Her heart broke as she watched Marcus keep his head down and try to ignore them while they tormented him. The grandmother had lived through many difficult times in her life. She had seen bullying before and knew how dangerous it could become if left unchecked. She watched as the boys grew bolder, getting closer to Marcus and becoming more aggressive. When one of them picked up a larger rock, she knew this had gone too far. That evening, after the boys had finally left and Marcus had come inside, his grandmother made an important phone call. She dialed the number for Marcus's grandfather, Samuel, and told him everything she had witnessed. Her voice shook with anger and concern as she described how the boys had chased and humiliated her grandson. Samuel listened quietly on the other end of the phone. When his wife finished speaking, there was a long pause. Samuel had been wondering why Marcus seemed more quiet than usual during their training sessions. Now he understood. His grandson was being hunted like prey, and Samuel knew from experience that this kind of situation only got worse unless something changed. Jake Miller had been planning something big for weeks. He was tired of Marcus just walking away every time they bothered him. Jake wanted to see Marcus cry or beg or fight back. He wanted to prove to everyone at school that he was the one in charge and that nobody could ignore him without consequences. On Wednesday morning, Jake started spreading word around school about what he called a special show. He told students in the hallways that something exciting would happen behind the gymnasium after school on Friday. He did not say exactly what it would be, but he hinted that it would involve the fat kid that everyone knew about. By Thursday, almost everyone in school had heard about Jake's plan. Some students were excited, thinking they would see a fight. Others felt uncomfortable, but did not want to miss out on what everyone else would be talking about. A few students tried to warn Marcus, but he did not understand what they meant when they said he should be careful on Friday. Marcus had no idea that Jake was planning anything special. He continued his normal routine of going to classes, eating lunch in the library, and heading to his grandfather's house after school. During his training sessions with Samuel, Marcus seemed distracted. His grandfather noticed that the boy was not focusing on his movements the way he usually did. Samuel decided to ask Marcus if everything was okay at school. Marcus hesitated before answering that some kids bothered him sometimes, but it was nothing serious. Samuel knew there was more to the story, especially after the phone call from Marcus's grandmother. But he also knew that Marcus would tell him when he was ready. Friday came and Jake was practically bouncing with excitement. During lunch, he reminded his friends about the plan. They would wait for Marcus behind the gymnasium, where there were no teachers around. Jake had already told several students to be there with their phones ready to record everything. He wanted proof of what he was going to do. After the final bell rang, students began gathering behind the gymnasium. Word had spread so widely that more than 50 kids showed up, forming a loose circle and chatting excitedly about what they thought was going to happen. Some teachers had heard rumors about something happening after school, but they were busy with meetings and did not investigate. Marcus left school through his usual exit and walked toward the path that would take him to the bus stop. He had his backpack slung over one shoulder and was thinking about the homework he needed to finish that weekend. He planned to stop by his grandfather's house to train before going home for dinner. As Marcus walked past the gymnasium, he noticed that there seemed to be a lot of students in an area where people usually did not hang out. He could hear voices and laughter, but he did not think much of it. He just wanted to get to the bus stop and avoid any trouble. But Jake had been watching for him. When Jake saw Marcus walking alone, he signaled to his 3 friends. They quickly moved to block the path Marcus was taking, forcing him to change direction. Marcus looked around confused as he realized he was being surrounded. The crowd of students noticed what was happening and quickly formed a circle around Marcus and Jake's group. Students pulled out their phones and started recording. Some were laughing and making jokes, while others watched quietly, not sure what they were about to see. Marcus found himself trapped in the center of the circle with his back against the brick wall of the gymnasium. He looked around at all the faces staring at him and felt his heart start beating faster. There were too many people for him to push through, and Jake and his friends were blocking the only clear path out. Jake stepped forward with a big smile on his face. He had been waiting for this moment for months. Finally, he had Marcus exactly where he wanted him, with dozens of witnesses to see whatever happened next. Jake cracked his knuckles and looked at his friends, who were grinning and encouraging him to start the show. Marcus set his backpack down slowly and looked around the circle again. He had never been in a situation like this before. In all his years of training with his grandfather, they had practiced fighting techniques, but Samuel had always emphasized that fighting should be the last resort. Now Marcus was wondering if that moment had finally arrived. The crowd grew quiet as everyone sensed that something was about to happen. Phones were held high to capture every moment. Jake took another step closer to Marcus, and the circle of students pressed in tighter, making sure nobody could escape and that everyone would have a good view of whatever was about to unfold. Jake Miller looked around at the crowd of students watching him. This was his moment to show everyone at school that he was not someone to mess with. He had been building up to this for weeks, and now he had Marcus exactly where he wanted him. The fat kid had nowhere to run and 50 witnesses to see what happened next. Marcus stood with his back against the cold brick wall of the gymnasium. His backpack lay on the ground where he had dropped it, and his glasses had slipped down his nose. He could hear the students around him talking and laughing, some of them placing bets on how long he would last before crying or begging Jake to stop. Jake cracked his knuckles and stepped closer to Marcus. He was shorter than Marcus but more muscular from playing basketball. He had been in fights before and always won because he was aggressive, and his friends backed him up. He looked at Marcus's scared face and felt a surge of power. Without warning, Jake threw his first punch straight into Marcus's stomach. The hit was hard and unexpected, causing Marcus to double over in pain. The crowd roared with excitement as they saw the big kid finally getting what Jake thought he deserved. Students held their phones higher to make sure they captured every moment. As Marcus bent over trying to catch his breath, one of Jake's friends saw an opportunity. He stepped behind Marcus and kicked him hard in the back, sending him down to his knees on the concrete. The crowd cheered even louder, some students jumping up and down with excitement. Marcus stayed on his knees for a moment, feeling the sharp pain in his stomach and back. He could hear the students around him laughing and shouting encouragement to Jake. Some were already sharing the videos they had recorded on their phones. Marcus felt more alone and helpless than he had ever felt in his life. Jake grabbed Marcus by his shirt and pulled him back up to his feet. He wanted to see the fear in Marcus's eyes before he hit him again. But as Jake looked into Marcus's face, he saw something unexpected. Instead of the tears and begging he was expecting, Marcus was looking at him with an expression Jake had never seen before. Something had changed in Marcus during those few seconds on the ground. As he knelt there listening to the crowd laugh at his pain, memories started flooding back. He remembered all the times Jake had knocked his books down, all the names he had been called, all the times he had gone home feeling ashamed and helpless. But most importantly, Marcus remembered his grandfather's words from years of training. Samuel had always told him that there comes a time when a person has to stand up not just for themselves, but to protect others from getting hurt. Marcus realized that if he did not stop Jake now, Jake would just find other victims to pick on. Marcus also remembered something else his grandfather had taught him. Real strength was not about hurting people for fun or to show off. Real strength was about protecting those who could not protect themselves. And right now, Marcus was the one who needed protecting, but he was also the only one who could stop Jake from doing this to someone else. As Jake pulled Marcus up by his shirt, Marcus felt something awakening inside him. All those years of training in his grandfather's basement suddenly seemed more real than ever before. The techniques he had practiced hundreds of times, the discipline his grandfather had taught him, the control he had learned over his body and mind, it all came rushing back. The crowd was getting louder and more excited. Some students were even making jokes about how pathetic Marcus looked. But Marcus was no longer hearing their voices clearly. Instead, he was focusing on his breathing, just like his grandfather had taught him. He was remembering the stance, the movement, the precision that came from years of practice. Jake wound up his arm for another punch, this time aiming for Marcus's face. He wanted to give the crowd a real show, something they would talk about for weeks. But as Jake's fist moved toward him, Marcus did something that shocked everyone watching. He caught Jake's fist in midair. The crowd suddenly went completely silent. Jake's eyes widened in surprise as he felt Marcus's strong grip around his wrist. For the first time since the whole thing started, Jake felt a small flutter of uncertainty in his stomach. This was not going according to his plan. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Jake tried to pull his fist back, but Marcus held it firmly in place. The crowd of students stared in disbelief as the fat kid they thought was helpless showed strength they never knew he had. Marcus slowly stood up to his full height, still holding Jake's wrist. Marcus looked directly into Jake's eyes and spoke in a calm, quiet voice that somehow carried clearly through the silence. He said he did not want to fight, but he was tired of being hurt and watching Jake hurt others too. Jake tried to jerk his hand free again, but Marcus's grip was like iron. Jake's confidence was starting to crack. This was not how things were supposed to go. The fat kid was supposed to cry and beg, not stand there looking at him with those steady, serious eyes. Jake called to his 3 friends to help him, and they quickly moved in to surround Marcus. What happened next was like watching a completely different person. Marcus released Jake's hand and stepped back into a fighting stance that none of the students had ever seen before. His grandfather had drilled these movements into him for 7 years, and now his body moved with practiced precision. The first of Jake's friends rushed at Marcus from the side. Marcus sidestepped smoothly and grabbed the boy's arm as he passed. Using the attacker's own momentum, Marcus threw him over his shoulder in a perfect judo throw. The boy hit the ground hard and lay there stunned, the wind knocked out of him. The crowd gasped in amazement. Nobody had expected the quiet, heavy kid to move so fast, or with such skill. Students started murmuring to each other, asking if Marcus knew martial arts and where he had learned to fight like that. Jake was getting angry and embarrassed. His friends were supposed to help him beat up Marcus, not get thrown around like toys. He charged at Marcus with both fists swinging wildly. But Marcus had been training for this kind of chaotic attack. He ducked under Jake's punches and delivered a precise strike to Jake's ribs. Jake stumbled backward, holding his side and breathing hard. Marcus had hit him just hard enough to hurt, but not to cause serious damage. Marcus's grandfather had taught him that real fighters controlled their power and only used what was necessary. The second friend tried to grab Marcus from behind, thinking he could wrestle the big kid to the ground. But Marcus sensed him coming and spun around quickly. He caught the boy's wrist and twisted it just enough to make him cry out and back away. Marcus then pushed him firmly but not violently, sending him stumbling into the crowd. By now, even the teachers who had heard the commotion and come to investigate were watching in shock. They had come expecting to break up a typical bullying incident, but instead they were seeing one student defend himself with skills that seemed almost professional. The third friend looked at his two companions, who were both on the ground or backing away, and decided he did not want any part of this fight. He raised his hands and stepped back, making it clear he was done. Marcus nodded at him with respect, acknowledging his smart choice. Jake was breathing heavily and looking around at the crowd. Many students were now filming with their phones, but instead of recording his victory like he had planned, they were capturing his defeat. His reputation as the tough guy who could pick on anyone was crumbling in front of everyone. Marcus picked up his backpack and put his glasses back on properly. He looked around at the circle of students, many of whom were staring at him with new respect and curiosity. For years they had seen him as the quiet fat kid who let people walk all over him. Now they realized they had not really known him at all. Jake made one last attempt to save face. He wiped blood from his split lip and told Marcus this was not over, that he would get him back later. But his voice shook as he said it, and everyone could tell he did not really believe his own words. Marcus walked calmly toward the edge of the circle. Students moved aside to let him pass, some of them nodding with respect, others just staring in amazement. As he walked away, Marcus could hear the crowd erupting in excited chatter behind him, everyone trying to process what they had just witnessed. The crowd behind the gymnasium buzzed with excitement and disbelief. Students who had come expecting to see Marcus get beaten up were now replaying videos on their phones, watching in slow motion as the quiet kid had taken down Jake's entire crew with moves that looked like they came from a movie. As Marcus walked away from the scene, word was already spreading through text messages and social media. Students who had not been there were receiving videos and could hardly believe what they were seeing. The fat kid everyone ignored had just demolished the school's biggest bully using fighting techniques nobody knew he possessed. Jake sat on the ground holding his ribs where Marcus had hit him. His friends were slowly getting up, both looking embarrassed and hurt. The boy who had been thrown by Marcus's judo move was still trying to catch his breath. They had never been in a fight where they were so completely outmatched. Some students approached Jake to see if he was okay, but most were more interested in talking about Marcus. They were asking each other questions nobody could answer. Where had Marcus learned to fight like that? How long had he been training? Why had he never used those skills before? The videos started appearing on social media within minutes. Students posted them with captions like, "You won't believe what just happened at school," and "That quiet kid Marcus just destroyed Jake Miller." The footage showed clearly how controlled and precise Marcus's movements had been, and how he had only used enough force to defend himself. By evening, the videos had been shared hundreds of times. Students from other schools saw them and commented about how impressive Marcus's fighting skills were. Some people tried to guess what martial art he knew, with suggestions ranging from karate to mixed martial arts. Marcus had no idea about any of this online activity. After leaving the school, he went straight to his grandfather's house as usual. He sat in the basement and told Samuel everything that had happened. His grandfather listened carefully without interrupting. When Marcus finished his story, Samuel was quiet for a long time. Then he told Marcus that he was proud of him, not just for defending himself, but for showing restraint and control. Samuel explained that many people could learn to throw punches, but it took real discipline to use only the force necessary, and no more. Samuel also told Marcus that his life at school would probably change now. People who had ignored him before would want to be his friend. Others might try to challenge him to prove they were tough. Samuel advised Marcus to stay humble and remember that fighting should always be the last choice, never the first. Meanwhile, Jake went home with bruises and a damaged ego. His parents asked what had happened, and Jake mumbled something about falling down during basketball practice. He could not bring himself to admit that he had been beaten by the kid he had been bullying for months. Jake's friends were dealing with their own embarrassment. They had never imagined that Marcus could fight back, let alone defeat all of them so easily. They started to question whether picking on Marcus had been such a good idea after all. The teachers who had witnessed the end of the fight were having their own discussions. They realized that Marcus had been getting bullied for much longer than they had known. They felt guilty for not noticing or stopping it sooner. They also wondered how Marcus had learned to fight with such skill and control. Principal Martinez called Marcus's parents that evening to talk about what had happened. He explained that while the school had a zero-tolerance policy for fighting, the video evidence clearly showed that Marcus had been defending himself against multiple attackers. After reviewing all the footage and talking to witnesses, he decided that Marcus would not be suspended. Marcus's parents were shocked to learn about both the bullying and their son's fighting abilities. They had known he visited his grandfather regularly, but they thought he just helped with household chores. When they learned about the training sessions, they were upset that Marcus had never told them about being bullied. Marcus's mother cried when she realized how much her son had been suffering in silence. His father felt angry and proud at the same time. Angry that his son had been hurt, but proud that Marcus had stood up for himself when he needed to. That night, Marcus lay in bed thinking about everything that had changed in one afternoon. For years he had endured bullying because his grandfather had taught him to avoid fighting unless absolutely necessary. Now he wondered if he should have acted sooner, before things got so bad. Monday morning came and everything at school felt different for Marcus. As he walked through the hallway, students turned to stare at him, but not in the same way as before. Instead of looking through him or making cruel comments, they watched him with curiosity and respect. Jake Miller was not at school. Word had spread that he was staying home with what his parents thought were injuries from basketball practice. Everyone who had seen the videos knew the real reason for his absence. Some students joked that Jake was too embarrassed to show his face after getting defeated so thoroughly. Marcus's first class was English, and when he walked in, the whole room went quiet. Students who had never spoken to him before nodded and said hello. Some asked if he was okay after what happened Friday. Marcus was not used to this kind of attention and felt uncomfortable with all the questions. During lunch, instead of eating alone in the library as usual, Marcus was approached by several students who wanted to sit with him. They asked him where he had learned to fight and if he could teach them. Marcus politely declined to discuss his training, remembering his grandfather's advice to stay humble. A girl named Sarah, who had often been bullied by Jake's friends, thanked Marcus for standing up to them. She said she felt safer at school now knowing that someone could stop bullies when they went too far. Marcus had not thought about how his actions might help other victims of bullying. Word of the fight had reached the teachers and administration. Principal Martinez called Marcus to his office during fourth period. Marcus worried that he was in trouble despite what the principal had told his parents. But when he arrived, he found a different reception than he expected. Principal Martinez told Marcus that after reviewing all the evidence and talking to many witnesses, it was clear that Marcus had acted purely in self-defense. He also said that several students had come forward to report bullying they had witnessed over the months leading up to the fight. The principal apologized for not recognizing the bullying situation sooner. He explained that the school was implementing new policies to better identify and address bullying before it reached the point where students felt they had to defend themselves physically. Marcus was relieved to learn he would not be punished, but he was also concerned about Jake. Despite everything Jake had done to him, Marcus did not want him to get in serious trouble. Principal Martinez assured Marcus that Jake would face appropriate consequences, but would also receive counseling to help him understand why his behavior was wrong. After school, Marcus went to his grandfather's house as usual. Samuel had been thinking about the situation all weekend and wanted to talk more with Marcus about what came next. He reminded Marcus that having people know about his fighting skills could be both good and bad. Samuel explained that some people might now try to challenge Marcus just to test themselves against him. Others might expect him to solve all the school's bullying problems. Samuel warned Marcus not to let the attention go to his head or make him think he had to fight every battle. Shown in the fight, they practiced together in the basement, but Samuel focused more on mental training than physical techniques. He taught Marcus exercises for staying calm under pressure and explained how to de-escalate situations without fighting. Samuel wanted to make sure his grandson understood that real strength meant choosing not to fight whenever possible. Meanwhile, Jake's absence from school was becoming a bigger story than the fight itself. His friends were getting asked constantly about where he was and what really happened to him. They were learning what it felt like to be on the receiving end of unwanted attention. The two friends who had been defeated along with Jake were back at school, but keeping a much lower profile. They no longer walked around with the arrogant attitude they used to have. Other students looked at them differently now, knowing they had been part of the bullying and had been stopped by Marcus. Some of Jake's former victims began speaking up about their experiences. They felt empowered by seeing that Jake could be stood up to successfully. A few students even approached school counselors to report bullying incidents they had never talked about before. The viral videos continued spreading beyond the school. Local news outlets picked up the story about the quiet student who had defended himself against multiple bullies. Some people online praised Marcus for his restraint and skill, while others debated whether violence was ever the right answer to bullying. Marcus's parents met with his grandfather that evening to discuss the situation. They were grateful that Samuel had taught Marcus to defend himself, but they worried about the attention he was receiving. They decided that the family would not speak to any reporters and would let the situation calm down naturally. As Marcus went to bed Monday night, he reflected on how different his life had become in just one weekend. He no longer had to fear walking through school or worry about when Jake would next bother him. But he also understood that this new attention came with its own challenges and responsibilities. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. Marcus had proven he could defend himself when necessary, but now he had to prove he could handle success and recognition with the same wisdom and restraint he had. By Tuesday, the questions about Marcus seemed to be coming from everywhere. Students approached him between classes wanting to know details about his training. Teachers looked at him differently, some with newfound respect, others with concern about how the situation would affect school safety. Marcus tried to maintain his normal routine, but it was impossible to ignore how much everything had changed. In his history class, the teacher, Mr. Johnson, asked him to stay after the bell rang. Marcus worried he was in trouble, but Mr. Johnson simply wanted to check if he was handling all the attention okay. The teacher told Marcus that he had seen the videos and was impressed by the restraint Marcus had shown. Mr. Johnson had served in the military and recognized real martial arts training when he saw it. He advised Marcus to be careful about who he trusted with details about his abilities, as some people might want to take advantage of them. During lunch, a group of younger students approached Marcus and asked if he could protect them from some 8th graders who had been bothering them. Marcus felt uncomfortable with the request. He explained that he could not be everyone's protector and encouraged them to talk to teachers or counselors about the bullying instead. Marcus realized that his grandfather had been right about people expecting him to solve all the school's problems. Students who had never spoken to him before were now coming to him with their troubles, assuming he would use his fighting skills to help them. Marcus had to learn to say no while still being kind. The school counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, called Marcus to her office Wednesday afternoon. She wanted to understand the bullying situation better and to make sure Marcus was coping well with the aftermath of the fight. Marcus found it strange to finally talk openly about months of harassment he had endured in silence. Mrs. Rodriguez told Marcus that Jake had been suspended for a week and would be required to attend counseling sessions when he returned. She also said that Jake's friends who had participated in the bullying would face consequences as well. The school was taking the incident seriously and using it as an opportunity to address their bullying policies. Marcus asked Mrs. Rodriguez if she thought Jake would try to get revenge when he came back to school. She said that was possible, but that the school would be watching the situation closely. She also reminded Marcus that he could always come to her if he felt threatened or unsafe. Some students were disappointed that Marcus would not talk about his martial arts training or demonstrate any techniques. A few even suggested that maybe the whole thing had been lucky and that Marcus was not really as skilled as the videos made him look. Marcus ignored these comments and focused on his schoolwork. Thursday brought an unexpected visitor to the school. A reporter from the local newspaper had heard about the incident and wanted to interview Marcus for a story about bullying and self-defense. Principal Martinez and Marcus's parents declined the interview request, wanting to protect Marcus's privacy and let the situation settle down. At home, Marcus's parents continued to process what they had learned about their son's secret training and the bullying he had endured. His mother felt guilty for not noticing that something was wrong, while his father was proud that Marcus had finally stood up for himself. Marcus's grandfather, Samuel, came to dinner Thursday night to talk with the whole family about the situation. He explained to Marcus's parents that he had been teaching Marcus not just how to fight, but more importantly, when and when not to fight. Samuel said he was proud that Marcus had used his skills responsibly and only when absolutely necessary. The family discussed whether Marcus should continue his training now that his abilities were no longer secret. Samuel suggested that Marcus might benefit from joining a formal martial arts school where he could train with other students and compete in tournaments if he wanted to. Friday marked 1 week since the incident behind the gymnasium. The intense interest in the story was finally starting to die down as other school events captured students' attention. Marcus was grateful that he could walk through the hallways without feeling like everyone was watching his every move. Some positive changes had emerged from the whole situation. Several students who had been victims of bullying felt more confident about reporting incidents to teachers. The school had held assemblies about bullying and bystander intervention, using Marcus's situation as an example of how serious the problem could become. Jake's friends who had been part of the bullying were keeping a much lower profile. They seemed to understand that their behavior had consequences and that other students would no longer tolerate their actions. Some of them even apologized to students they had bothered in the past. Marcus began to realize that while the fight had solved his immediate problem with Jake, it had also created new challenges. He had to learn how to balance his desire for a normal school life with the reality that many people now saw him differently. He was no longer just Marcus the quiet kid, but Marcus who could fight when pushed too far. As the weekend approached, Marcus looked forward to spending time training with his grandfather. He wanted to process everything that had happened and think about what kind of person he wanted to be going forward. The fight had revealed abilities he had kept hidden, but more importantly, it had taught him about courage, restraint, and the responsibility that came with strength. 2 weeks after the incident behind the gymnasium, Jake Miller returned to school. He walked through the hallways with his head down, much the way Marcus used to do. Students stared at him, but now they were the ones with power, and he was the one who felt uncomfortable and exposed. Jake had spent his suspension in counseling sessions where he was forced to confront why he had bullied others. The counselor helped him understand that his need to feel powerful had come from his own insecurities and fear of being picked on himself. Jake realized that hurting others had never actually made him feel better about himself. On Jake's first day back, he saw Marcus in the hallway. For a moment, both boys stopped and looked at each other. Jake expected Marcus to be angry or threatening, but instead Marcus simply nodded and continued to his class. Jake was surprised by this calm reaction and realized that Marcus held no grudge against him. During lunch, Jake sat alone at a table in the cafeteria. His former friends had distanced themselves from him, not wanting to be associated with someone who had lost a fight so publicly. Jake watched as Marcus sat with a group of students who seemed to genuinely enjoy his company, not because they feared him, but because they respected him. Marcus had indeed found new friendships after the incident. Students who shared his interests in reading and studying had approached him, no longer intimidated by his size or worried about being associated with a bullying victim. Marcus discovered that there were many kind, intelligent students at school he had never had the chance to meet. The bullying problem at school had decreased significantly after the incident. Other potential bullies had seen what happened to Jake and realized that their victims might not be as helpless as they appeared. Students also felt more empowered to report bullying when they saw it, knowing that the school was taking such incidents seriously. Marcus used his experience to help other students who were being bullied. He didn't solve their problems with fighting, but instead encouraged them to seek help from counselors and teachers. He also showed them by example that they could be confident and self-assured without being aggressive or mean to others. Principal Martinez asked Marcus to speak at a school assembly about bullying prevention. Marcus was nervous about addressing the entire school, but he agreed because he thought it might help other students. He spoke about the importance of treating everyone with respect and about how keeping problems secret only made them worse. During his speech, Marcus emphasized that fighting should always be the last resort. He told the students that real strength came from walking away from unnecessary conflicts and from helping others instead of hurting them. Many students were impressed by his maturity and thoughtfulness. Marcus's grandfather, Samuel, was invited to the school to meet with counselors about developing a conflict resolution program. Samuel suggested teaching students meditation and stress management techniques as alternatives to fighting. He believed that many conflicts could be prevented if young people learned to control their emotions better. The school implemented several new programs based on the lessons learned from Marcus's situation. They created peer mediation groups where students could help resolve disputes between their classmates. They also started a program where older students mentored younger ones who might be at risk of bullying or being bullied. Jake eventually approached Marcus privately to apologize for months of harassment. Marcus accepted the apology and told Jake that he hoped they could both move forward in a positive way. Jake was grateful for Marcus's forgiveness and began working with the school counselor to help other students who had bullying tendencies. Marcus decided to join the school's martial arts club, which had been started after his incident showed how many students were interested in self-defense. He became one of the club's leaders, teaching other students not just fighting techniques, but also the philosophy of martial arts that his grandfather had instilled in him. By the end of the school year, Marcus had transformed from an isolated, bullied student into a confident young leader. He maintained good grades while also helping to create a more positive school environment. His story had shown other students that it was possible to stand up to bullying while still showing mercy and forgiveness. Marcus's parents were proud of how their son had handled the attention and responsibility that came with his newfound status at school. They supported his continued training with his grandfather and his involvement in school programs aimed at preventing bullying. Looking back on everything that had happened, Marcus realized that the confrontation with Jake had been a turning point not just for him, but for many people at the school. Students were kinder to each other, teachers were more aware of bullying situations, and the school had become a safer place for everyone. Marcus learned that true strength was not about being able to fight, but about having the courage to do what was right even when it was difficult. He understood that his grandfather had been preparing him not just to defend his body, but to defend his character and values. As Marcus prepared for his final year of high school, he felt confident about his future. He had proven to himself and others that he could overcome adversity while maintaining his principles. Most importantly, he had learned that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their size, appearance, or background. The quiet boy who had once eaten lunch alone in the library had become a voice for positive change in his school community. Marcus's journey showed that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones who can create the most meaningful impact on the world around them.